Yes, amahoro amahoro abakunzi ba East African Daily Update ni Jean Paul Turayishinyibahaye ikaze mu biganiro byacu byo kuri uyu munsi nk'uko nari nabibasezeraniye rero ndabona igisigaye gusa ari guhuza iyi UN cyangwa se urabona ko ntari ahantu hari mu rumuri rwiza ndashaka guhuza. Are you serious ko bisa nkaho okay, ndashaka guhuza UN iriya nama UN na YouTube yanjye maze mugakurikira live nibwo bagitangira ntabwo baramara kabiri. Reka rero mpuze iyi live stream ya UN hanyuma mukurikire ikiganiro. Okay, one second, just a second. Hanyuma abumva indi cyongereza, good luck to you. Here we go. Done.
And combatants significantly increases the risk of a regional conflagration. This development threatens not only the stability of eastern DRC, but of the entire Great Lakes region. In recent months, however, significant diplomatic progress had nevertheless been achieved. The signing of the Washington Accords between the DRC and Rwanda on the 4th of December, the Doha Framework Agreement concluded on the 15th of November between the government of the DRC and the AFC M23, as well as the 14 October Agreement establishing a joint ceasefire mechanism and verification mechanism, testified to strong regional and international mobilization in favor of political solutions enabling the establishment of lasting peace in eastern DRC. I take this opportunity to commend the engagement of Qatar, the US and the African Union mediator, His Excellency for Nasingbe, who made these advances possible, and I reaffirm the full support of the United Nations and particularly MONUSCO for the ongoing peace efforts. The recent developments in South Kivu undeniably illustrate the gap existing between diplomatic efforts and the reality experienced by civilians affected by persistent hostilities. In this context, the prompt implementation of Resolution 2773 of the Security Council, calling among other things for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, and for all parties to honour the commitments undertaken within the Washington and Doha processes, remains essential if diplomatic progress is finally to translate into tangible improvements in the situation on the ground. While recent diplomatic progress has generated genuine hope, persistent ceasefire violations and the resumption of hostilities pose a real risk of the collapse of ongoing diplomatic efforts. The growing gap between political commitments and their effective implementation on the ground undermines the credibility of peace processes, weakens trust among the parties, and fuels the sense of abandonment felt by civilians. Without concrete and immediate measures to ensure compliance with agreed commitments, conflict dynamics may close the door to dialogue.
South Kivu, which is no longer within MONUSCO's area of operation, the AFC M23 advances in UVIRA territory and its reporting capturing of UVIRA town on the 9th of December, with the alleged support of the Rwandese Defense Forces, RDF, has triggered a major military escalation just days after the signing of the Washington Accords. Congolese forces, alongside Burundian forces and local Wazalendo militia, have reportedly engaged in large-scale hostilities involving the use of heavy artillery and air power. These clashes have resulted in military and civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and significant population displacement, including into neighboring Burundi. In North Kivu, the AFC M23 has continued to pursue its strategy of territorial expansion and further consolidation of parallel administration in areas under its control, in clear violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, across North Kivu and Ituri, civilians continue to face grave threats from a range of armed groups, both foreign and Congolese. In Lubero territory in North Kivu, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, killed at least 132 civilians during the month of November alone. in Ituri, Codeco, Zaire, and CRP fighters continue to operate near major displacement camps where MONUSCO is alone in providing direct physical protection for more than 100,000 displaced persons. Mr. President, since SRSG Keita's last briefing to this Council, the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office has continued to document numerous grave violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence committed by armed groups and state actors. Women and children are disproportionately affected, and cases of forced displacement, sexual violence, arbitrary killings, and abductions remain widespread. In areas under AFC/M23 controlled, restrictions on MONUSCO's access continue to impede its ability to fully monitor
constitutes a central pillar of MONUSCO's action. In North Kivu and in Ituri alike, the mission has strengthened its preventive approach based on deterrence presence, risk anticipation, and close engagement with communities. In Ituri, where armed groups operate in the immediate vicinity of displacement sites, MONUSCO maintains daily patrols and community alert mechanisms, which have helped prevent multiple attacks and protect particularly vulnerable areas. In North Kivu, the mission continues to establish early warning systems and reinforce mobile patrols, particularly in areas exposed to AFC M23 expansion and to targeted ADF attacks. MONUSCO also ensures constant dialogue with communities, especially women and youth, in order to ensure that the protection provided fully meets their needs and realities on the ground.
Mr. President, the humanitarian
contain the growing regionalization of violence. The Council has the necessary political and normative tools to ensure compliance with its resolutions, support ongoing mediation efforts, and send an unequivocal message to all regarding the
1533 concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is my intention to provide an overview of the work of the committee since my last briefing on 27 June 2025. Mr. President, since the last briefing, the committee held 3 informal consultations in 2025. During the meeting held on 2nd July 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the main findings and recommendations contained in the group's final report, following which committee members discussed the findings and recommendations contained therein. During the meeting held on 20th October 2025, the coordinator of the group of experts provided an overview of the program of work of the group of experts, considering Resolution 2783. During the meeting held on 27th October 2025, the committee received a briefing by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs on behalf of the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, pursuant to paragraph 5 of the Resolution 2664. Mr. President, in accordance with paragraph 115 of the note by the President of the Security Council, dated 13th December 2024, the committee issued 2 press releases containing a brief summary of the informal consultations held respectively on 2nd July and 20th October. Thank you, Mr. President.
I think, Ambassador, Imran Kanu for his briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdelmonem.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the invitation to brief this Council on the humanitarian situation in the Eastern DRC. Excellencies, good morning. Mr. President, allow me to begin with a truth this Council must acknowledge. Despite the appearance of political momentum in recent months, and despite the signing of peace agreements, MSF teams continue to witness staggering levels of violence, displacement, and deprivation in the Kivus and Ituri. Our patients describe fleeing bombed villages and extreme brutality. From MSF's vantage point in hospitals, clinics, and displacement sites, the picture is unambiguous. This crisis is not easing. Health systems are collapsing, sexual violence is widespread, and humanitarian access and funding are shrinking as needs rise. The gap between political signaling and lived reality of millions is widening. In fact, the ink has barely dried on the agreement signed in Washington, and M23 has already launched a sweeping offensive in Uvira, driving an estimated 200,000 people from their homes, 40,000 of them into Burundi. Stark evidence that the promise of peace is masking a landscape of persistent large-scale violence. It is increasingly clear that ongoing peace efforts are serving to consolidate the extractive interests of powerful actors rather than to bring the people of DRC relief. None of this is new. The violence communities face is rooted in decades of resource predation and structural neglect. This is the enduring tragedy. Generation after generation of Congolese have seen their lives and dignity sacrificed at the altar of politics and profit. Until civilians are no longer treated as expendable, no political process will bring real relief. Mr. President, despite high-level commitments in Washington and Doha, violence against civilians remains routine. Both state forces and non-state armed groups, including M23, FDLR, ADF, elements of the FARDC and their Wazalendo allies, continue to endanger civilians and obstruct access to care. All have been implicated in grave violations of international humanitarian law, summary killings, sexual violence, looting, and blocking humanitarian assistance. The toll is devastating. In Binza, MSF patients described men cut down in the fields and women and children shot along the riverbank, their bodies left to drift downstream, testimonies which echo wider reports of massacres in North Kivu. Several of our patients said these attacks were carried out by members of M23. In Rutshuru Hospital, trauma admissions rose by 67% in July. More than 80% of gunshot victims admitted to MSF-supported facilities in July and August were civilians. In Ituri, over the course of this year, we have carried out more than 1,500 trauma surgeries in one single hospital, most for wounds related to conflict. Medical facilities and staff are not spared. Ambulances have been stopped at gunpoint, and armed actors have stormed medical facilities, threatening and terrorizing both patients and staff. In Masisi, just 2 weeks ago, the Kazinga Health Center, clearly marked with MSF insignia, was looted and destroyed by a Wazalendo militia. 3 MSF colleagues have been killed this year. These violations underscore a profound failure to protect civilians. Mr. President, sexual violence in Eastern DRC is a long-standing emergency which has scarred communities for decades. Today, it continues at an unimaginable scale. In the first 6 months of this year alone, nearly 28,000 survivors sought care in MSF-supported facilities in Eastern DRC. That's an average of 155 survivors each and every day for 6 months. 3 out of 4 attacks are committed by armed individuals. Attacks occur in fields, on roads, at water points, and inside homes. Many survivors reach care too late for preventative treatment. Many never reach it at all. At the same time, essential medical supplies are running dangerously low. In North and South Kivu, half of all health zones lack post-exposure prophylaxis, leaving survivors without the critical care that could prevent infection, avert unwanted pregnancy, and reduce long-term harm. The scale and normalization of sexual violence reflect a profound collapse of community protection and a near total absence of accountability. Women and girls tell us that sexual violence is not simply feared, it is expected. Mr. President, the health system is collapsing under the combined weight of violence, chronic neglect, mass displacement, aid cuts, and emerging parallel administrations. In many areas, up to 85% of facilities face critical drug shortages, nearly 40% of health personnel have left their posts, and more than half of facilities we have evaluated have closed or been damaged. The consequences are lethal. In Walikale, deaths of severely malnourished children arriving within 24 and 48 hours of admission rose by 89% and 309% compared to last year. Families arrive far too late, delayed by insecurity, cost, and the absence of functioning care. Preventative health services have crumbled, and vaccination is repeatedly disrupted, leading to an upsurge in preventable infectious diseases. Cholera cases already exceed 38,000, and deaths have more than doubled compared to last year. Measles continues to spread. A malaria outbreak of unknown proportions is unfolding, while neither diagnostics nor essential treatments are available to contain it. Mr. President, as needs grow, the space to deliver humanitarian assistance is contracting. Across Eastern DRC, state and non-state actors alike impose restrictions unrelated to civilian needs. Life-saving assistance is delayed, diverted, or blocked. The closure of the Goma and Bukavu airstrips and the failure of Kinshasa and M23 to reach an agreement to reopen them has reduced entry points for supplies and personnel into Eastern DRC and slowed movements within the Kivus. Reaching Walikale can now take more than a month during the rainy season. Shifting conflict lines have also meant that delivering supplies from Bukavu to Uvira has required crossing 4 international borders at 4 times the previous cost. Humanitarian access is not optional, it's a legal obligation. Airports must be reopened, and passage along key routes must be secured, and medical and humanitarian supplies must move without impediment. On top of the collapse of civilian protection and the erosion of access, major donors are cutting support and eliminating life-saving services in full view of surging needs. Mr. President, commitments made in capitals mean little when they are not matched with concrete measures on the ground. We make 3 calls. First, civilian protection must be placed at the center of all political and diplomatic engagement. Progress cannot be measured by the number of agreements signed, but by whether people are safer in their homes, on the roads they travel, and in the places they seek care. Second, humanitarian access must be upheld, not as a gesture of goodwill or a confidence-building measure, but as a moral obligation underpinned by international humanitarian law. Third, the humanitarian response must be resourced at the level this crisis demands. Without flexible, timely funding, preventable deaths will continue to mount. In conclusion, Mr. President, from where we stand, beside patients, not behind podiums, these debates do not lack awareness, they lack consequence. This Council is regularly briefed on the situation in DRC. Members are able to describe violations civilians face with precision, even as those violations continue unchecked. For people living through this conflict, the question is not whether this Council understands their reality, it is why that understanding so rarely translates into meaningful protection. This disconnect is damning, and that failure is profound. If this Council cannot act when so many lives are at stake, then the promise of civilian protection becomes a hollow doctrine, recited here, but absent where it is most needed. What is required today is neither new rhetoric nor new diplomatic architecture. It is the will to insist that civilians are not expendable and that their rights to safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Not in DRC, not anywhere civilians are under threat. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Dr. Javid Abdelmonem
cyane
for his briefing.
nkunze
I now
mu
give the
by'ukuri
floor to
avuga
those
ko
council
UN
members who wish
ntabwo ari uko
to make
yabuze
statements.
ntabwo ari uko UN yabuze
I give
ntabwo
the
ari uko
floor
itazi
to the
ikibazo
representative of
ikibazo ni
France.
ukuta ibyo bazi
Thank you,
nta ngaruka
Mr. President.
donc
I'd like to
ababikora
begin
nta
by
ngaruka
thanking the Under-Secretary
bibagiraho.
General, Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, as well as the President of Médecins Sans Frontières, Dr. Mohamed Javed Abdelmonem, for their very illustrative remarks. I also thank the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone, Mr. Michael Kanu, for his briefing in his capacity as chair of the 1533 Sanctions Committee on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Finally, I also welcome the presence of the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC, Her Excellency Madame Thérèse Kayikwamba-Wagner, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi. We meet today as the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces, has launched an offensive on UVIRA this week, only a few days after the Washington Agreement was signed on the 4th of December. This situation should be of deep concern to the Council at a time when its members are deliberating on the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate. I will stress three messages. Firstly, the offensive by the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces, endangers regional stability and threatens the security of civilians. The capture of the city of Uvira in South Kivu, on the border with Burundi, carries serious and imminent risks of regional escalation and directly threatens the security of neighboring countries. The use of suicide drones constitutes a worrying escalation. These clashes have forcibly displaced tens of thousands of civilians, further worsening the situation in a region already facing the second most severe humanitarian crisis in the world. The international community mobilized to assist affected populations during the Paris conference on the 30th of October. France reiterates the urgent need to protect civilians. Commitments under the Declaration of Principles and the Doha Framework Agreement. Secondly, in this context, France reaffirms its confidence in the mediators. The African Union, in particular, through the presences of Angola and Togo, the United States and Qatar, have undertaken immense efforts to achieve a lasting settlement of the conflict, which has devastated the peoples of the Great Lakes region for several decades. This is not the time to weaken the support expected from all members of this Council. We must collectively reaffirm the need for all parties to respect international humanitarian law and their obligations regarding the protection of civilians. Resolution 2773 must be fully implemented, and all actors, beginning with its call for an unconditional, effective and verifiable ceasefire. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC is non-negotiable. Provocative actions or hate speech that endangers civilians must cease. The Washington agreements must be respected. The Doha Framework Agreement must be implemented. And we call for a continuation of the efforts of the African Union. Recent events risk undermining progress toward a lasting political resolution of the crisis. My third message: we must not allow this situation to jeopardize MONUSCO's mandate or the negotiations underway. As the Under-Secretary General pointed out, MONUSCO continues to play an essential role when it comes to protecting civilians and with regard to a lasting solution to the conflict. France, as penholder, has presented a proposal intended to position MONUSCO in a role supporting all peace efforts. This includes the question of ceasefire monitoring, for which MONUSCO has clear advantages thanks to its presence on the ground, its expertise, its capabilities, and its impartiality. The restrictions imposed by the M23 on its freedom of movement and access to essential supplies are unacceptable and must end. We therefore call on the members of the Council to continue negotiations in good faith, bearing in mind the responsibility they hold in light of the current situation, and knowing that this delegation will be following the situation very closely. Mr. President, the people of Eastern DRC, the countries of the region and troop contributing countries expect the Council to rise to the occasion and meet its responsibilities given the urgency of the moment for peace in DRC and the region. I thank you.
by'ubufaransa mu
I
by'ukuri uretse
thank
kuba mu karindwi
the
karindwi
representative
gatatu
of France
numvise ari
for the
ibya
statement,
monusco
and I give the floor to
gufasha
the representative of Sierra Leone.
kugenzura
Thank you again, Mr. President.
ceasefire.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3+ members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone.
abanyafurika.
We wish to thank Under Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Mr. Javid Abdelnomen for their briefings on the situation on the ground. We welcome the participation of Her Excellency Mr. Kayikwamba Wagner, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the representatives of Rwanda and Burundi to this meeting. Over the past 3 decades, MONUSCO and its predecessor mission, MONUC, have been present in the DRC, supporting efforts for peace, stabilization, and the protection of civilians in a context marked by recurring armed conflict, complex humanitarian challenges, and a major political transition. The A3+ reiterate our deep appreciation to the mission for its continued service and dedication to the Congolese people under extraordinary challenges. Yet, as we meet today, peace and stability in the DRC remain volatile despite sustained regional and international diplomatic efforts. We would also like to express our profound appreciation to Ms. Bintou Keita, SISG in the DRC and head of MONUSCO, for her leadership and commitment to advancing peace and stability in the DRC. Our dedicated service to the Congolese people, particularly our efforts to safeguard and support civilians, have been invaluable. Mr. President, the recent development in Eastern DRC, most notably the fall of UVIRA city, the last major settlement in South Kivu, to the M23 AFC rebels, is profoundly alarming. Even more alarming is the worsening humanitarian situation for the civilian population who have been displaced, fleeing across the borders in search of safety and potentially creating pressures for receiving countries. We underscore the importance of supporting these countries as they serve as safe havens for those fleeing the violence in the DRC. The A3+ remains gravely alarmed by the humanitarian situation in the DRC, which has long been among the worst, most severe. The renewed offensive in South Kivu risks overwhelming an already overstretched and critically underfunded humanitarian system. With over 5.7 million people internally displaced and an estimated 24.8 million facing food insecurity amid acute security and access constraints. Humanitarian personnel cannot sustain operations under continued hostilities in South Kivu. Reports from international humanitarian organizations on the ground are also alarming. According to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, nearly 200,000 people have been displaced, with women and children bearing the greatest burden of this renewed violence. It is thus absolutely necessary for this Council to act decisively to halt the escalation of the conflict in Eastern DRC. In view of this, we must remind all parties to the conflict of their obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law to protect civilians during conflict. Mr. President, The A3 Plus further reiterates that the solution to this conflict remains fundamentally political. We are therefore encouraged by last week's signing of the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity by President Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame, witnessed by African leaders, including President João Lourenço of Angola and chairperson of the African Union, President Faure Gnassingbé, President of the Council of Ministers of Togo, and the African Union appointed mediator of the crisis between the DRC and Rwanda, and President His Excellency Mohamed Ali Yusuf, chairperson of the African Union Commission. As underscored by the AU chairperson, and I quote, "The Washington Accords represent an important moment to put an end to a conflict that has lasted for more than 3 decades, a conflict between brothers and neighboring countries who, for various reasons, have been fighting one another over the years with heavy consequences both for the population and the economies of their respective countries." End of quote. The A3 Plus fully echoes this sentiment and mediation effort of African stakeholders. We therefore urge all parties to honor their recent commitment undertaken in Doha and Washington, D.C., and to work in good faith towards lasting peace, stability, and prosperity throughout the Great Lakes region. Mr. President, the renewed offensive in South Kivu comes at a time when the Council is discussing the future of the presence of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC. In light of the current realities on the ground, discussion on MONUSCO's future must be approached with the utmost care and with the interest of the people of the Great Lakes region.
ndabona bikomeza ariko ni mu kanya ntabwo bitinda. Mu by'ukuri ni nko gusubiramo ibintu bagiye bagaruka igihe cyose, baravuga impamvu ari important
Center.
kubahiriza
The safety of their lives and
amasezerano.
livelihoods
Ndumva yagarutse,
and
reka dukomeze
enabling their
tumukurikire.
prosperity.
Okay, reka nze dukomeze tumukurikire. Baravuga gusa ko hari impamvu bagomba kubahiriza abasinye amasezerano, bagomba kubahiriza aya
of the Doha and Washington
masezerano ya
processes.
Washington ndetse na Doha,
Harmonizing these
ndetse no
proposals will
kubahiriza
require sincere engagement and understanding of African perspective, moving beyond symbolic acknowledgement towards meaningful inclusion of African solutions. Mr. President, to conclude, the A3 Plus is of the view that in renewing the mandate of MONUSCO, the mission must be provided with the necessary operational flexibility to support implementation of the mandate, not only in terms of protecting civilians, but where appropriate, deployment and targeted return to critical areas currently lacking a permanent presence of governmental authority. Additionally, the mandate should strengthen MONUSCO's role in supporting transitional justice and accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The A3 Plus stands firmly in solidarity with the Congolese people and all affected communities in the region. With the resilience and unity of the Congolese people, supported by regional mechanisms and international effort, we believe that a sustained solution to this conflict is within reach. The A3 Plus will continue to offer its unwavering support towards the realization of these aspirations.
Okay, uwo yari
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
n'abanyafurika
Thank you,
bishyize
Mr.
hamwe.
President,
Reka
and thank you to our
tumve
briefers today.
important
Colleagues,
muri Amerika
President
kuko ari
Trump
bo
was pleased to have convened DRC President Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Kagame in Washington on December 4th for the signing of the Washington Accords and the Regional Economic Integrated Framework. It was a true and sincere demonstration and effort towards peace. However, peace processes require parties to uphold their commitments to that very process. And the United States is profoundly concerned and incredibly disappointed with the renewed outbreak of violence in the eastern DRC. Today, I want to share with you some additional information on the scope and the sophistication of Rwanda's involvement in Eastern DRC. Since its reemergence in 2021, Rwanda has had strategic control of its proxy armed group, M23, as well as M23's political wing, the Congo River Alliance, or AFC, and has deployed M23 and the AFC to achieve Rwanda's geopolitical goals in Eastern DRC. Kigali has been intimately involved in planning and executing the war in Eastern DRC, providing military and political direction to M23 forces and AFC for years now. The Rwandan Defense Forces have provided materiel, logistics, and training support to M23, as well as fighting alongside M23 in DRC with roughly 5,000 to 7,000 troops as of early December. This is not counting the possible increases from Rwanda in this most recent advancement. In more recent months, Rwanda has deployed multiple surface-to-air missiles and other heavy and sophisticated weaponry into North and South Kivu to aid M23 in its conflict against DRC. Rwanda and M23 began their offensive just this last weekend to take UVIRA, with Rwandan forces co-located with M23 along the front lines. Additionally, we have credible reports of increased use of suicide drones, increased use of artillery by both M23 and Rwanda, including strikes into Burundi. So rather than a march towards peace, as we saw under President Trump's leadership in recent weeks, Rwanda is leading the region towards increased instability and war. And in light of the commitments made in the Washington Accords, we are deeply concerned that the Rwandan military's continued presence in Congolese territory in support of M23, and we will use the tools at our disposal to hold to account spoilers to peace. We call on Rwanda to uphold its commitments and to further recognize the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo's right to defend its territory and its sovereign right to invite Burundian forces onto its territory. We are engaging with all sides to urge restraint and to avoid further escalation, including refraining from hostile anti-Tutsi rhetoric. As this council negotiates the MONUSCO mandate, the United States will seek to ensure the mission has the capabilities to provide support to both the Doha and Washington agreements, keeping in mind that the parties themselves bear full responsibility for their successful implementation, and we look for the members of this council's support as we negotiate this mandate's renewal. MONUSCO's ability to provide critical enabling support to these processes, however, hinges entirely on its ability to move freely, to sustain itself, to implement its mandate without interference. And the fact that UN peacekeeping forces are under siege by forces backed by a member state that itself is a troop contributor to peacekeeping missions, frankly, is a sad hypocrisy. Unfortunately, M23's months-long blockade on MONUSCO has undermined its ability to operate effectively in and out of Goma, as many representatives have stated here today. And for its part, Rwanda continues to deploy surface-to-air missiles and additionally conduct spoofing and jamming operations, which have effectively grounded MONUSCO air operations. So how can MONUSCO succeed under these conditions? We demand the immediate end of such obstruction, which violates M23 and Rwanda's obligations under both the Doha and Washington agreements, respectively. We remain steadfast in our support of MONUSCO and its role in the realization of these historic agreements, which we believe hold great potential to end the decades of suffering in Eastern DRC. I thank you, Mr. President.
Wow, wow.
I thank the representative
This is great.
of the United States for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Burusiya.
We're grateful to Undersecretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix for his briefing. We're grateful to the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone for his report as the chairman of this 1533 Sanctions Committee on the DRC. We carefully listened to Dr. Mohamed Javid Abdel Moneim.
This
We
is
welcome
great.
the participation in the meeting of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and the Diaspora of the DRC, Madam Teresa Wagner, as well as representatives of Rwanda and Burundi. Today's meeting, unfortunately, is taking place against a background of a serious escalation in South Kivu as a result of an offensive by the M23 group. We have often repeated that we are particularly concerned about developments in this province. It is located, the city of UVIRA, which is located near the border of Burundi, has for several months faced the threat of encirclement and assault by the M23. This situation, just a few days after the summit in Washington, once again demonstrates that international diplomatic efforts do not produce tangible results and do not, in essence, have an impact on the situation on the ground. There can be no talk of an effective truce or a ceasefire. All this simply remains an expression of intentions by the sides on paper. Today, the Great Lakes region has nearly reached a dangerous line, beyond which a large-scale military confrontation between states can take place. We appeal to the sides to halt their fire and to focus on real steps to resolve the crisis and to create normal conditions of life for the civilians of all countries of the region. Rwanda, as well as the DRC, must begin to implement Security Council Resolution 2773 and stop cooperating with the M23 and the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR. As long as these basic precepts are willfully ignored, the situation will only continue to deteriorate. I would like to underscore that we support all international efforts aimed at ending the armed conflict in the east of the DRC and the achievement of a long-awaited peace for the Congolese and their neighbors. There can be no doubt about that. However, the agreements signed in Washington and in Doha must be assessed based on how they're being implemented, and the current situation in South Kivu is indicative of the real attitude of the participants of the negotiating process to the agreements they signed on to. We note the efforts of the UN peacekeeping mission on the stabilization of the DRC. Many peacekeepers have sacrificed their lives in stabilizing the situation in the DRC. We also note the role of the head of MONUSCO, Bintou Keita. However, in current conditions, MONUSCO continues to remain a hostage to the escalation between the states of the region. MONUSCO has been in this situation for almost a year, since the January escalation of the armed conflict as a result of the actions by the M23. Over 40% of the personnel of the mission are in fact confined to UN facilities on the territory that is under the control of that group in North Kivu. Russia has often stressed that this kind of situation is unacceptable and cannot continue. However, some colleagues in the Council and their supporters in the Secretariat have all this time insisted to us and other members of the Council that on the need to wait just a little longer and for the results of international mediation to make it possible to revive MONUSCO. The mission could indeed play an important role in contributing to resolving the crisis, in particular in terms of monitoring the cessation of hostilities. However, bearing in mind the developments in South Kivu, it's quite obvious that conditions have not been met for this at this time. If you will, hurrying up to propose unconventional solutions should have been done earlier. Today, what we need is an extremely cautious approach. Any serious changes in the mandate of MONUSCO must take into account the real situation on the ground and be based on clear and detailed recommendations to the Secretariat. Only such an approach will make it possible to make the mission operational again. I'd like to stress that we're ready to work with colleagues in the Council to formulate instructions to the Secretariat to ask them to present to us possible options of involving MONUSCO in monitoring the ceasefire regime and overall adapting the mission to the current circumstances. However, we will not agree to poorly designed initiatives at odds with reality. Forcing them through on political grounds will ultimately only worsen the already complex situation of MONUSCO and will lead to yet another blow to the reputation of UN peacekeeping. Thank you very much.
Okay, ibyo mu Burusiya murabizi ko ntajya mbitindaho cyane, ntabwo njya mbitindaho, nabo bafite ibibazo byabo, ariko disikuru nyinshi z'aba bantu ziba zigaruka.
My thanks to our briefers who have brought
Ushobora kuba nawe
clarity and
wazibandikira
insights
ukazibaha
to our
bakazisoma uko zakabaye.
discussions. And I welcome the participation in today's
Twumva
meeting
Ubwongereza.
of Her Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and of Burundi. And I thank the chair of the 1533 committee for his update. President, I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom welcomes the signing last week of the Washington Accords and the signing of the Framework Agreement in Doha last month. We commend the leadership of the United States, Qatar, and of the African Union in driving these efforts. We call on the parties to implement the agreements and to honour their commitments in full. Second, we are deeply concerned that despite progress on the political tracks, violence has increased in South Kivu. We condemn the recent M23 offensive and takeover of UVIRA with the support of the Rwandan Defence Forces. The UK urges an immediate cessation of hostilities and for all parties to fully comply with Security Resolution 2773. There can be no military solution to this conflict. This escalation in fighting has worsened an already dire humanitarian situation, which will only further deteriorate as refugees flee across the border into Burundi following M23's latest offensives. We are greatly concerned by continued reports of human rights violations and abuses, including conflict-related sexual violence, on which we have heard tragic testimony from Médecins Sans Frontières today, perpetrated by the parties to the conflict, and in particular by M23 and Wazalendo. The United Kingdom calls on the parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including ensuring the protection of civilians. Third, the United Kingdom reiterates our full support for MONUSCO. The mission continues to play a vital role, especially in supporting the protection of civilians. We also express our support for a MONUSCO role in ceasefire monitoring to embed the progress towards peace and security made through the political process. It is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate without hindrance. We again call for M23 to lift all obstructions to the mission's operations. We urge all parties to ensure MONUSCO's freedom of movement in compliance with the decisions of this Council. President, the UK calls on all parties to now seize the opportunity to deliver the peace, prosperity and security that the people of Eastern DRC so deserve.
Okay.
I thank you.
nta kintu
I thank the
gihambaye
representative
kirimo mu
of the
by'ukuri
United Kingdom for her
gusa icyo
statement, and I give the floor to the
okay.
representative of
abantu
Panama.
bose baragenda bagaruka kuri
Thank you very
MONUSCO
much, Mr.
kandi
President. Allow
no
me to
kuvuga
begin
uruhare
by
rw'u Rwanda
expressing our
muri
appreciation
izi
to Monsieur
ntambara
Jean-Pierre Lacroix,
bose
as well as to Dr.
ntawe
Mohamed
ukivuga
Jabed
support noneho
Abdelmonem,
batangiye kuba ko
International
bafatanya
President of
barwana ku
Médecins Sans
ruhande
Frontières, for their valuable
donc side by
briefings.
side baba bafatanya buri kintu cyose
Your work
yes
on
reka
the
twumve
ground,
Panama kugeza
saving
ubu reka ndebe
lives in the midst
British
of so much violence
abafaransa
is so
US
important, and
Russia
we express our condolences for your staff members that have lost their lives in their service. We also welcome the presence of the distinguished permanent representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and we welcome the permanent representatives of Rwanda at this session. Panama highlights the recent diplomatic progress, including the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, which was reached in June 2025, facilitated by the United States, as well as the framework agreed in Doha between the government of the DRC and the M23, signed on the 15th of November 2025. However, the reality on the ground reminds us that the signing of agreements does not equate with peace. What we heard from USG Lacroix and from Médecins Sans Frontières makes it clear that while we're talking here, hundreds of thousands of lives are hanging by a thread. The current situation that MONUSCO is facing in Goma is a source of serious concern, particularly due to the restrictions affecting its operational capacity. In this context, it is essential to guarantee full freedom of movement for its personnel and to ensure the implementation of its mandate, as well as respect for international law, in order to preserve the safety of its staff and the continuity of its operations. Furthermore, Panama underscores the importance of the full implementation of Resolution 2773, which establishes essential parameters for the protection of civilians and the advancement of the transition, as well as of the sanctions regime renewed through Resolution 2783. This is a key tool to reduce the operational capacity of armed groups, combat illicit economies, and pressure all actors to comply with their obligations. Mr. President, our delegation particularly welcomes the formal approval of the Regional Economic Integration Framework signed by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of Rwanda on the 4th of December in Washington, D.C. We believe that this progress represents a genuine opportunity to bring to an end more than a decade of conflict and suffering in the region, if it is implemented on time and respected by all the parties. Renewed violence is only making it difficult to grasp this great opportunity for peace. Nevertheless, more than 7 million people remain internally displaced, and the most recent reports reveal that over 80% of health centers in North Kivu and South Kivu lack essential medicines and the necessary personnel to serve the entire population. And we continue to closely follow the recent fall of the city of Uvira, and we agree with the concerns already expressed by other members of this council in that regard. This situation, aggravated by advances of the M23, attacks on infrastructure and the severe humanitarian funding gap, place thousands of people at risk who require urgent treatment for diseases such as malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, which disproportionately affect women, girls, and boys. Panama would make an urgent appeal to donors to close the funding gap of the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan and to strengthen operational capacities on the ground. The protection of humanitarian staff must be given priority, and this aid must not be politicized, and it must arrive without restrictions to those that most need it. The presence of MONUSCO remains crucial for the protection of civilians and for supporting the Congolese government's efforts in the area of security, governance, and stabilization. This Council has reiterated that the withdrawal of the mission must be gradual, responsible, and conditions-based, not driven by rigid timelines. The drawdown of troops and flexible funding will produce effects that are contrary to what is desired. Mr. President, the Congolese people have paid an unacceptable price for decades due to regional instability, competition over resources, and the absence of strong institutions. Panama is convinced that there is no military solution to this crisis. Only a combination of national political will, genuine regional commitment that is sincere, and sustained support and unified support from this Council will make it possible to transform the potential of the Democratic Republic of the Congo into a reality of peace and development and prosperity for its population. Thank you very much.
Representative of Panama for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Under-Secretary Lacroix, Chair of the DRC Sanctions Committee, Ambassador Akanama, and
UN
Dr.
Security
Abdel
Council
Monaim
permanent
for their
members
briefings.
abanyamuryango
I welcome the
bahoraho
presence of
bose
DRC Foreign Minister, Her
uyu niwe
Excellency
wa
Kai
nyuma
Kwanba,
China
as well as
urangije
the representatives
kuvuga
of
ndibaza
Rwanda and
igisigaye
Burundi
bari
at
buze
today's
guha
meeting.
Kayikwamba ijambo
The current situation in Eastern DRC
n'u
remains
Rwanda
tense.
of course
Escalating
yenda
conflict and
hari
violence have led
n'u
to a
Burundi
grave
nyuma
humanitarian
reka dukurikire
crisis.
aba basigaye
The international
batatu
community
nkeneye kumva uretse
must
ko
make
nabonye
concrete efforts to
ngabo
promote a
yatangiye kurya
de-escalation.
iminwa
I wish to emphasize
bitaranagera
3
aho bigera.
points. First, it is imperative to end hostilities immediately. M23 has launched a wave of offensives in recent days and captured key cities such as UVIRA, leading to a sudden escalation of tensions on the ground. China expresses deep concern over these developments and strongly condemns the violence committed by M23. We urge the group to implement Security Council Resolution 2773
Nice.
and relevant peace accords, immediately cease hostilities, withdraw
Okay. Nibura
from Uvira and other cities, and stop its expansion in order to prevent further spillover of the conflict. External actors should halt all forms of support for armed groups in Eastern DRC and work towards a de-escalation. All parties to the conflict must abide by international humanitarian law, protect civilians, including foreign citizens.
oh sorry.
Second, sincere dialogue and negotiation are essential. There's no military solution to the conflict in Eastern DRC. A political solution is the only way out. Although parties to the conflict have recently signed a spate of peace agreements, the situation on the ground has not truly improved. The priority now is for all parties to demonstrate political will and fulfill their commitments. The mediators on their part should also effectively fulfill their monitoring responsibilities. All parties should urge M23 to intensify its negotiation with the DRC, conclude the outstanding protocols of the Doha Framework for Comprehensive Peace Agreement, and ensure that the ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism is operationalized as soon as possible. China appreciates the contribution of the African Union and sub-regional organizations to peace in Eastern DRC. Any external process should maintain alignment and coordination with the AO process and respect the AO's leading role in the peace process of Eastern DRC. Third, the peacekeeping mission's ability to fulfill its mandate must be secured. Currently, MONUSCO is grappling with ongoing restrictions of movement, interruption of its water, electricity, and fuel supplies, as well as downsizing and budget cuts. The mission is only capable of sustaining basic operations. The Security Council should urge the relevant parties to lift movement restrictions on MONUSCO and, at the same time, conduct a comprehensive assessment of the challenges that affect the mission's mandate delivery with a view to finding solutions. MONUSCO can play a role in supporting the peace process in Eastern DRC, including ceasefire monitoring. However, any adjustments to MONUSCO's mandate must be based on the situation on the ground, with a feasible plan and predictable outcomes, and must and must be fully assessed by the Secretariat. Rushing decisions prematurely or even treating the MONUSCO mandate as a carte blanche will only further disrupt MONUSCO's mandated activities and undermine the credibility of both the mission and the Security Council. MONUSCO is a UN-led peacekeeping mission, and its actions should be guided by the UN Charter and reflect the common will of member states. China reiterates its firm support for MONUSCO in fulfilling its duties. President, the situation in eastern DRC is now at a critical juncture. The international community should set aside geopolitical calculations, build consensus for peace, join forces with all parties, and genuinely commit to regional peace, development, and prosperity. As a good friend of countries in the region, China remains committed to working with all parties to make unremitting efforts for the settlement of the conflict as well as development and stability in eastern DRC. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by thanking our briefers, to welcome Her Excellency the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic
China
of the Congo,
wumvise
as
ko
well as
batavuze
the
izina Rwanda, batavuze
representatives
ijambo
of
Rwanda,
Rwanda and
kandi
Burundi to this
Rwanda
meeting,
bagira
and to thank
mu
the
Rwanda
chair
hari
of
abantu benshi bajya bavuga Ubushinwa, Ubushinwa
1533
nta kintu
committee
bajya
for
kuri
his
ibintu
update.
babirebera ku
Mr.
ruhande
President,
ntibashaka
almost
kuvuga
a year since the dramatic escalation of the conflict
ntabwo
in
ntibajya
eastern
bavuga
DRC, we
ikireba
meet at a moment
donc iyo
of both
bigeze aho
fragile
ngaho ku
progress
bintu
and
bijyanye n'abantu
persistent
bafitanye umubano
acute risks.
baruma bahuha.
Important
Reka
steps have
twumve
been
Ubugiriki,
taken, yet many
ndabona
decisive
hakiri
actions
abandi.
still lie ahead. I would like to stress the following points. First, we repeat that Resolution 2773 must be implemented immediately, fully, and unconditionally. We remain particularly alarmed by the deteriorating security situation in South Kivu, driven by the continuing advance of the AFC M23 with the alleged support of the Rwandan Defense Forces, and the risk of a spillover of the conflict that could trigger a regional crisis. AFC M23 must immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from Goma, Bukavu, and all other controlled areas. As the Council stressed in its recent press statement, all illegitimate parallel administrations must be dismantled, restoring state authority throughout the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In this context, we reiterate Greece's steadfast support for the independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Second, we welcome all efforts towards a ceasefire and a sustainable peace, stability, and reconciliation in eastern DRC, and commend the United States and Qatar for their critical mediation efforts. We congratulate President Tshisekedi and President Kagame for the signing of the Washington Peace Accords for Peace and Prosperity on December 4th, as well as the issuing of the joint declaration on the accords by the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. We urge them to now accelerate the implementation of their commitments as provided by the accords. These gains must not be undermined by a new escalation in South Kivu by the M23. We also welcome the signing of the Doha Framework for Peace between the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the AFC M23 on November 15th, and we urge them to materialize their commitment to a permanent ceasefire. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian and security consequences of the conflict both in North and South Kivu and in Ituri, as we have heard by our briefers today. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access and facilitate humanitarian flights as well. We are particularly concerned about the grave human rights violations and abuses committed against women and children, notably large-scale recruitment and use of children, abductions, killings and maimings, and shocking levels of sexual violence. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian law and of violations and abuses of human rights must be held accountable and be brought to justice. Finally, MONUSCO's freedom of movement must be unobstructed and its ability to operate must remain unrestricted. Resolution 2773 reiterates the Council's full support for MONUSCO, whose works remains critical in the DRC in protecting civilians, responding to urgent humanitarian needs, and supporting the implementation of the peace process. We emphasize once more our strong commitment to the safety and security of MONUSCO's personnel. Madam President, as the Council considers the upcoming renewal MONUSCO's mandate, Greece stands ready to work closely with all members to ensure that the mission can continue fulfilling its critical role at this pivotal juncture for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Labgar, Ambassador Kanu, and Dr. Abdelmonem for their briefings, and also welcome Her Excellency Ms. Teresa Kairamba Wagner, DRC's Foreign Minister,
Okay.
and the
Numva rero
representative of Rwanda
abahasigaye
and Burundi to this meeting.
agiye kubanza uwa Congo
To
hanyuma.
begin, we strongly condemn the M23's
No, I'm so sorry.
recent advance in UVIRA in
Ni
South
Korea,
Kivu,
Republic of Korea.
a serious development which risks further
Ndebe
escalating
abasigaye
the
reka
conflict
mbabwire
across the
abasigaye
region. The unanimously adopted Resolution 2773 demands that M23 immediately cease all hostilities, withdraw from all controlled areas, and the Rwanda Defense Force and its support of M23. We urge all parties to fully and immediately implement this urgent call from Security Council. I'd like to highlight following 3 points. First, the conflict cannot be resolved by the force under any circumstances. In this regard, we welcome the ongoing efforts toward a political solution, including the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity, signed on 4 December between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and welcome the United States mediation efforts. We urge all parties to faithfully implement their commitments. We also recognize the efforts of Qatar and African Union to advance both Washington and Doha processes. Regional cooperation is indispensable for the sustainability of the agreement. We encourage this political process to be closely aligned with regional mechanisms, including ICGLR. Second, while our expectations should remain high, they must take into account the reality on the ground. In this regard, we are deeply concerned by the recent offensive expansion of M23 and discouraged by the local community's continuing voice. Nothing has changed. Armed groups such as ADF and Codeco, which are not parties to the ongoing peace processes, continue to carry out attacks against civilians and civilian facilities, including hospital and church. Such attacks must stop immediately. We also call on the DRC government and MONUSCO to redouble their efforts, not only to disarm, dismobilize, but also to reintegrate their armed groups. The situation on humanitarian front is also alarming. 5.7 million people remain internally displaced, and food insecurity and medical conditions continue to worsen. Humanitarian assistance to those in need must be swiftly delivered. We condemn any actions that obstruct this effort. Third, MONUSCO's active role is more necessary than ever, particularly at a time when security conditions on the ground continue to contradict the parties' previous pledges. We expect MONUSCO to play a meaningful role in ensuring that the ongoing peace process are effectively implemented. To carry out its mandate fully and effectively, the mission must guarantee full freedom of movement and uninterrupted access to its operational infrastructure. I urge M23 to immediately lift all restrictions imposed on MONUSCO, including access to electricity, fuel, water, as well as troop rotations. We recall that under the Washington Accord, both DRC and Rwanda agreed to support and facilitate MONUSCO's capability to implement its mandate. We therefore urge all parties to translate their commitment into concrete action. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea remains firmly committed to a stable and peaceful DRC and support MONUSCO's vital role in this endeavor. In this vein, we will continue to remain engaged with developments in DRC and discussions on MONUSCO's forthcoming mandate renewal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea
haracyariho
for the
Denmark
statement,
sinzi
and
ko
I give the
bavuze
floor to the representative of Denmark.
Denmark. Okay, niwe
Thank you, Mr.
ukurikiye.
President.
Okay.
And let me also thank USG
So,
La
ubwo ni
Croix and
ukuvuga
Médecins
ngo
Sans
hasigaye
Frontières for their
Algeria,
briefings. And I would like to welcome the participation of
Guyana,
Her Excellency Foreign Minister
Pakistan,
Wagner, as well as representatives of Rwanda and Burundi in this meeting.
Slovenia,
2025 has been a
Somalia
year
sinzi
of
nimero
major
y'abariya
developments in the
batandatu,
DRC.
ubwo hasigaye
Despite
bakabona
consistent
guha
challenges on
DRC
the ground,
ijambo.
MONUSCO has continued to deliver. Denmark commends MONUSCO for its tireless efforts in support of peace in extremely difficult circumstances. Mr. President, allow me to raise 3 points. First, we commend the collective mediation efforts by the United States and Qatar, as well as the key role played by the President of Togo as the African Union appointed lead mediator and a panel of facilitators. We welcome the signing by the Presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda of the Washington Accords on 4 December and the signing by DRC and the M23 of the Doha Framework for a Comprehensive Peace Agreement on 15 November. However, we are deeply concerned that the commitments made by these parties are not being upheld. Just this week, continued advances of the M23 AFC and the intensified clashes in South Kivu resulted in mass casualties and destructions of civilian infrastructure. We call on all parties to refrain from further escalation and remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. We further urge M23 and the Rwanda Defense Forces to immediately halt offensive operations. In line with Resolution 2773, Denmark reiterates its call on Rwanda to withdraw its troops from eastern DRC and end its support to the M23, as well as we call on the DRC to cease its support for the FDLR. The latest developments strongly underline the need for an immediate cessation of hostilities, leading to a permanent and verifiable ceasefire. Second, Denmark remains concerned by the appalling human rights situation in eastern DRC. We condemn widespread reports of conflict-related sexual violence incidents, notably the use of rape and other forms of sexual violence, including against children. We strongly support the recommendations by the fact-finding mission on the DRC to integrate accountability and transitional justice into peace negotiations and strengthen efforts to prevent and punish conflict-related sexual violence. As we've heard from our civil society briefer today, these violations and abuses are taking place in the context of a catastrophic humanitarian situation. We reiterate our calls for unhindered and safe humanitarian access, including through Goma Airport. We welcome the pledges made on the Great Lake Conference in Paris in October and urge their rapid implementation. My final point, Mr. President. As we approach the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate, Denmark underlines our support for the mission, as well as the critical need for its presence for stability and the protection of civilians in eastern DRC. MONUSCO's mandate must reflect the current operational reality and respond to the situation on the ground, both with regard to possibilities for support to the peace processes and emerging protection needs. We thank the peacekeepers who put their life at risk in the DRC. We underscore that all parties must cease obstructions of the mission's operations and ensure its freedom of movement, resupply, and troop rotations. Let me conclude by expressing our deep appreciation of Special Representative Bintou Keita for her dedication and leadership during her time as head of MONUSCO. We look forward to the timely appointment of her successor at this critical time for the mission. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Okay, Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Ubwo hasigaye niba Pakistan
Join
irimo
colleagues in welcoming the presence of the
Algeria,
Honorable Foreign Minister of the
probably
DRC to
Guyana,
this meeting, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda.
Slovenia.
Pakistan thanks the briefers for the clear articulation of the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, deeply complex and challenging as it is, yet with an opportunity now to improve things on ground. We appreciate the outgoing SRSG, Bintou Keita, for a job well done under extremely challenging circumstances. President, we commend all MONUSCO personnel for their professionalism and courage under extraordinarily difficult conditions. We pay a solemn tribute to the peacekeepers who lost their lives, including those killed in the aftermath of the M23 takeover of Goma. Their services embody the highest ideals of the United Nations. The perpetrators of those attacks and their supporters must be held accountable. The situation in the Eastern DRC remains extremely volatile. The security environment has deteriorated sharply. Despite the commitments made in the Doha framework for a comprehensive peace agreement on a ceasefire, M23 continues its territorial expansion, including the recent takeover of UVIRA. And despite the signing of the Washington Agreement, the AFC M23 continue to receive external support. It is essential that commitments made under these agreements are implemented. We call for an immediate ceasefire and complete cessation of hostilities. It is regrettable that Resolution 2773 remains unimplemented. Nearly 40% of MONUSCO's area of oppression is under the control of the AFC M23. MONUSCO's movements in these territories are severely restricted. Its supply chains disrupted and troop rotations remain difficult. These conditions prevent the mission from implementing its mandate, particularly the protection of civilians. It is unacceptable that armed groups have imposed parallel administrations and stopped utilities of the UN personnel. We condemn these actions unequivocally. M23 must allow MONUSCO to perform its mandate assigned by this Council. It is equally important to address this situation in the context of the current mandate renewal of the mission. The mission must be given mandates that are realistic, achievable, and aligned with realities on ground. MONUSCO, as the only credible and impartial force, is uniquely positioned to play a central role in promoting peace and stability in the DRC. The Council should leverage MONUSCO's institutional experience, logistical reach, and operational presence. It is thus best placed to performing critical tasks, including monitoring and verifying a ceasefire once it is in place. The discussions on MONUSCO's potential ceasefire monitoring role in South Kivu are also important. Pakistan, as one of the largest troop contributing countries to South Kivu, had earlier cautioned that the withdrawal from South Kivu was premature and might create a security vacuum. Regrettably, that assessment has proven correct.
What do you mean?
This also
Ngo
underscores the
kuvuga ngo
need
muri
to
Kivu ngo ko
meaningfully consult
MONUSCO ngo
those who
byari
serve
kuzana
on the
ikibazo
ground.
ngo none ngo
Decision-making on
barabahaye
mandates and
warning bari
adjustments
barabibateguje none se
must better
ngo maho
integrate the
ntibari
views of
bariyo
troop and
bigeze aricyo
peace
byahinduye.
contributing countries and field leadership. It is also imperative the mandates be matched with commensurate resources. MONUSCO's budget was reduced by $45.3 million, leading to the repatriation of over 700 troops. A subsequent 25% contingency planning further decreased the mission strength by 1,550 personnel. And while the authorized troop ceiling remains at 11,500, MONUSCO currently has only around 8,234 troops on ground. This stark mismatch between the mission's responsibilities and shrinking resources must be urgently addressed to ensure that MONUSCO can effectively deliver on the tasks entrusted to it by the Security Council. President, Pakistan welcomes the recent diplomatic momentum aimed at achieving peace in the Eastern DRC. We appreciate Qatar for facilitating the Doha framework between the DRC government and M23. We also welcome the United States leadership in facilitating the Washington Agreement, signed on 4th December, as a historic step towards regional de-escalation and improved relations between the DRC and Rwanda. Pakistan further commends the African Union-led process under the mediation of Togo, which seeks to harmonize the Luanda and Nairobi tracks into a coherent African-led framework. We agree with Under-Secretary General Lacroix that the gap between the political and diplomatic efforts and the real impact on ground risks undermining these efforts. These processes must strive to address the root causes of the conflict in the DRC for lasting peace and stability. We reaffirm our support for the UN Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, whose role remains crucial in ensuring coordination and complementarity among these parallel efforts. It is essential that all peace initiatives remain mutually reinforcing and regionally supported and backed by the Security Council and grounded in safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. Finally, we urge the parties to demonstrate political will, to engage in serious dialogue and fulfill their obligations, and avail this opportunity that is presented currently by the high level of international engagement and support to realize sustainable peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Slovenia.
I think it was okay.
I thank Secretary General Lacroix and Ambassador Kanu for their updates.
Ubwo ni ukuvuga ko Slovenia niyo perezida nanaha
ubwo for his uncompromising frontline testimony. What we heard today must be yet another wake-up call. The human cost of this conflict is laid bare before us, stark, undeniable, and worsening by day. We welcome also the presence of the Minister Wagner from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representatives of Burundi and Rwanda. Slovenia remains alarmed by the continued sharp escalation of hostilities in eastern DRC, some unfolding even as this Council meets. These developments run directly counter to this Council's decision, in particular Resolution 2773. We welcome intensified diplomatic efforts by the US, Qatar, and African Union, including the signing of the Washington Accords and the Doha Framework for Peace. These diplomatic tracks hold promise, but must be translated into verifiable steps by all parties. As Slovenia has consistently stressed, no progress is possible without silencing the guns. And we agree with Under-Secretary General Lacroix, as well as with several colleagues, that declarations are not enough. Compliance must be demonstrated. Diplomacy must not be used as a shield behind which military gains continue. We call on all parties, Rwanda, the DRC, and the AFC M23, to fully and immediately uphold their commitments. The realities on the ground tell a different story. The latest advances of M23 in South Kivu marks a dangerous widening of the conflict. Slovenia condemns these offensives. We call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in line with 2773, and we call on M23 and Rwanda Defense Forces to halt all offensive operations and withdraw. Civilians must not bear the burden of promises that are not honored. We condemn every attack on civilians, medical facilities, humanitarian personnel, and critical infrastructure, not only by M23, but also violence of ADF, Codeco, Zaire, CRP, FDLR, and other armed groups. MSF has just briefed on attacks on health centers, mass displacement, and the immense difficulty conducting life-saving operations. Dr. Abdelmonem, we follow MFS's life-saving work closely, including the unbearable realities of your teams confront daily. The reporting of sexual violence and the sentence that they are not feared but expected, as you just said, is truly shocking, is devastating. Slovenia condemns this brutality in the strongest possible terms. We call on all parties to implement concrete, verifiable measures to reduce harm to civilians, including ceasing all attacks and guaranteeing safe movements for humanitarian actors, including reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports. Slovenia expresses its full support for MONUSCO, and we thank Ms. Bintu Keita for all her efforts and leadership as SRHG and her field-focused diplomacy. As we approach MONUSCO's mandate renewal, the Council must carefully reflect on the current context and trajectories ahead. MONUSCO must remain appropriately equipped and positioned to navigate rapidly changing conditions, particularly in protection of civilians, support to peace processes, disarmament and demobilization, and human rights monitoring. Colleagues, the people of the DRC need and deserve more than perpetual crisis management. We are of the view that with restraint, responsibility, respect for international law, regional cooperation grounded in respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, non-support to armed groups, and accountability, a path toward de-escalation, lasting peace remains possible. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Francophonie, and Congolese Diaspora of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, I am grateful for giving me the floor to examine the report of the Secretary General as well as to consider the renewal of the mandate of MONUSCO. I hail the quality of the report and I pay tribute to the DPPO, to humanitarian actors and all UN personnel who day after day work to protect civilians in conditions of extreme seriousness. We'd like to recall that the very rationale of this organization is to defend human dignity even when in adverse circumstances. I also hail here the presence here and the important contribution of Undersecretary General Mr. Jean Lacroix of Sierra Leone in its capacity as chair of the 1533 committee, and the president of Médecins Sans Frontières and the representative of Burundi. Mr. President, on the 4th of December of this year in Washington, Presidents Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame signed an agreement facilitated by the United States under the leadership of President Donald Trump. This agreement, supported by regional guarantors and international ones, brought and continues to bring the hope of a historic turning point. And yet, less than 24 hours after that signature, the facts have refuted the commitments undertaken. There were bombings, explosive drones, coordinated offensives around Uvira and in the Ruzizi plain. It's unacceptable that a solemn agreement should thus be trampled on the very day after it was signed on to. These actions put into question the dynamic created in Washington and confirm what the Secretary General's report underscores. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been implemented. Attacks against civilians persist. Humanitarian access is hindered, and the situation continues to worsen in spite of diplomatic efforts. Your Excellencies, the Democratic Republic of the Congo voluntarily chose the path of diplomacy. This choice is neither a concession or a sign of weakness. It reflects our control of this, our sense of responsibility and our faith in multilateral mechanisms, which are, if fully embraced, could still restore peace. We have made this choice because we believe in the commitment of the United States, the main facilitator of the Washington process. We believe in the steadfastness of the state of Qatar, guarantor of the Doha process, and in the norm and in the value of the Rwanda process as a framework. Its principles continue to guide the actions of the African Union, currently led by the Togolese Republic. The DRC has acted in good faith. It continues to act in good faith. Diplomacy for us is not some default setting. It is the very expression of our sense of responsibility as a state and our respect of international law. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, since the 4th of December in the evening, positions around Gatoguta, Ruvungi, Kaziba, Burambo, Luvungi, and along the Kamanyola-Uvira axis have been targeted by shelling coming from the positions of the RDF M23. Kamikaze drones have hit civilian areas. Over 500,000 people have once again been displaced. South Kivu, already in a precarious situation, has reached a breaking point. These facts have been documented by humanitarian mechanisms and confirmed by OCHA. They also create a major risk of regionalization. Shells have already hit Burundi. Uvira is only 30 kilometers from Bujumbura. No neighboring country can be exposed to such attacks without risking escalation. Regional stability cannot rest on the normalization of violations that are as serious as this. Mr. President, less than a week after the signature of the Washington agreements, certain actors have chosen to stray from the commitments freely undertaken. Reversing the narrative and using systematic disinformation to attribute to the Democratic Republic of the Congo the responsibility for attacks committed by the coalition RDF M23 is a well-documented strategy now by international mechanisms. We cannot accept for manipulation to become an instrument of regional policy. Facts are stubborn things. The resolution of the Security Council are even more stubborn. The truth is not negotiable. International law cannot be perverted to legitimize aggression. Observed violations contravene Resolution 2773, contravene the agreement of the 27th of June, the agreement signed in Washington on the 4th of December to the Doha Agreement, and the very conditions of the implementation of the Regional Economic Integration Framework that was also signed in Washington. Today, it is the very credibility of the entire process and of their guarantors that is at stake.
These members of the Council, we have reached a moment of truth. Either the international order accepts being openly defied, namely by Rwanda, or this Council assumes its responsibility. Impunity has gone on for far too long. The Congolese people cannot continue to bear the cost of commitments that are violated and resolutions that are not implemented. The facts are clear. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been respected. Foreign forces, namely the RDF, remain on Congolese soil. Civilians continue to be targeted. Humanitarian access is obstructed, and disinformation is being used deliberately to invert responsibilities and shield the perpetrators. The credibility of all processes, Washington, Doha, and the African facilitation depends on one principle: accountability. Without consequences, agreements have no force. Without consequences, the cycle of violence will continue. Resolution 2773 is not lacking in clarity. What is lacking is its enforcement. A resolution that is not enforced does not deter violence, it invites it. When violations carry no cost, impunity becomes policy. The responsibility now before this Council is not to restate its decisions, but to enforce them.
Mr. President, 9 months after the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2773, the conclusion is inexorable. Yet another city has fallen. A parallel administration has been consolidated. Thousands of additional families have taken flight. Others have been killed, raped, terrorized. And even MONUSCO, Blue Helmets, civilian personnel, leadership, have been targeted. Over the course of these 9 months, this Council has taken no concrete measure to uphold its own resolution and to defend its own mission. Appeals, warnings, but no action. This lack of action has allowed Rwanda to continue and expand its operations in an environment where violations bring about no consequences. The time has come for this Council to confront an essential question. To what extent, in 3 decades of crisis, the absence of coercive measures has contributed to the persistence of these violations? Mr. President, Resolution 2773 remains the lodestar of the UN's involvement. It must be implemented in its entirety without any ambiguity or exceptions. The Democratic Republic of the Congo calls for a robust, coherent mandate adapted to the realities on the ground, one that protects the very authority of this Council. A renewed mandate must guarantee the protection of civilians, reaffirm the withdrawal of foreign forces, support humanitarian operations, explicitly include the protection of blue helmets of civilian personnel and the leadership of MONUSCO, condemn any attacks against them, and prevent any circumvention of the decisions by the Council, because indeed, obstruction of the UN mandate by Rwanda M23 can never justify its weakening. This Council cannot cede in the face of this challenge to its authority. Mr. President, the DRC is an African country, but the DRC is also a fully fledged member of the international community. We respect African solutions to African problems. However, this cannot become a kind of legal relativism, making it possible to circumvent universal norms. There is no regional version of human rights or of sovereignty. Any lasting solution must be based on the universal principles of the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, the Congolese people have chosen peace. The people has demanded, negotiated, and signed onto it. It must not pay the price of the bad faith of those who shrug off their commitments. Peace cannot rest on promises not kept. The Congolese people are entitled to security, to justice, and respect for international law. This Council must act so that these rights do not remain theoretical, but allow
in 1994, in this chamber, Ambassador Kovac of Czech Republic, Ambassador Kateranye of New Zealand, Ambassador Gambari of Nigeria spoke that Rwandans were being exterminated, that an ethnic group in Rwanda was being exterminated. They had never been to Rwanda, but they discharged their responsibility, confronted denial and silence that was taking place in this chamber to call the genocide for what it was as it was happening in Rwanda. So I'm here today and I survive today because those courageous diplomats discharged their duty. I wanted to do it. The situation in South Kivu and the general situation obtaining after the Washington Agreement is a collection of many situations. The ceasefire that was repeatedly broken by the DRC government, that not only broke the ceasefire, but announced they would never stop attacks. Air attacks are offensives.
Wow.
Too. Even as the diplomatic tracks move forward, the situation on the ground in South Kivu continues to deteriorate in ways this council cannot morally or legally ignore. Over the past year, and in reality since 2017, the Banyamulenge, a Tutsi Kinyarwanda-speaking community of the DRC, have endured a well-documented, systematic, and escalating persecution. I just wanted to address this area alone, among many things that put it together cause the situation we are in. Allow me to highlight just a few incidents which are part of this sustained and systematic campaign of persecution of the Banyamulenge Kinyarwanda-speaking Tutsi ethnic group. Since 2017, more than 85% of Banyamulenge villages in South Kivu were destroyed. An estimated 700,000 cattle, which is their economic lifeline, were raided and killed. On August 25th of 2025, Wazalendo militias and FARDC issued a 10-day ultimatum demanding that all Banyamulenge leave Uvira or be killed. The ultimatum further prohibited them from accessing markets, water points, and other essential means of survival. On the 4th of September 2025, the decision was made to deny the Banyamulenge civilians access to public water points on the grounds that they were enemies. From the 5th to 8th of September 2025, Banyamulenge civilians were abducted and shot, while the mobs chanted for the end of the Banyamulenge. These are early warnings, indicators of atrocity crimes, discrimination, dehumanization, forced displacement, and the denial of basic services. Tens of thousands of Burundian soldiers were deployed into South Kivu on the invitation of the government of the DRC. This is in addition to the presence of FDLR, mercenaries, Wazalendo, and other militias. These troops established coordinated military blockades which exacerbated the situation above.
Wow.
Their operations alongside FARDC, FDLR, and the affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population. And I wanted to highlight here that there are other ethnic groups in that area. There are Babembe, Bafurero. There is another ethnic group that I don't remember. But these conditions I'm describing were imposed only on Banyamulenge Tutsi ethnic group. Banyamulenge, yes. The operations alongside FARDC and FDLR and affiliated militias imposed the siege on the Banyamulenge population, resulting in near a year of the communities in the being deprived of food, medicine, and humanitarian access. This situation was exacerbated by the coordinated military blockades. On the 16th to 18th of October 2025, the only road to the Mitamba market was closed, cutting off food supplies to civilians. On the 6th of September 2025, a group of 80 to 100, between 80 and 100 Banyamulenge civilians, mostly women, returning with food for their starving families, were ambushed by a FARDC Burundian Mai Mai coalition, and reports indicate killings, torture, and sexual
Burundi Mai Mai.
Equally well known, but disregarded, is the scale of air attacks carried out by DRC government forces and their allies, which continue to affect the civilians already under siege. Among many others are the following. On the 29th of August 2025, and multiple dates, repeated drone strikes hit the outskirts of Banyamulenge IDP camps around Mikenya. On the 27th of September 2025, a Burundian CH-4 drone bombed in Zibira in South Kivu. On the 15th of November 2025, Kinshasa operated drones bombed Mikenya, a village hosting Banyamulenge internally displaced persons. Between March and December this year, there has been 50 air attacks in this area. No one is speaking about this. I will appreciate the situation another day if we can be told this didn't happen. We have raised this, at least I did, with some members of the council, individually. We have raised this in this chamber. Nothing was done. The government of the DRC, as an inviting authority, should be responsible for the action and the conduct on the ground of Burundian forces and their allies. Rwanda has not been silent. I just said this. Rwanda has not been silent in the face of these developments. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs has raised the blockade directly with the mediators, the United States and Qatar, the representatives of the European Union and the African Union. And I have just said that I raised it with individual members of the Council. I raised it with the penny holder, with some presidencies, with the heads of some mechanisms in the region, and nothing happened. Taking into account the factual situation and the wider context of hate ideology in DRC and the inherent legal and moral obligation, allow me to ask the question. Has the Security Council not been aware of this situation? Or did it not? Did this situation not merit your attention? The situation in South Kivu, as we address it, we must consider what was the situation before the recent escalation. As a former investigator myself, there is what we call recreating the scene. From where we sit, we can only tell you the facts. But the Security Council can, among the wide possibilities you have, to recreate this scene. Choose to recreate it. But that is how it will look. All the principles that we have spoken about, sovereignty, territorial integrity, Rwanda is part of that multilateral belief that must be respected. But the existence of FDLR threatens all of that. Yes, facts are stubborn. Resolutions are more stubborn. And in the resolutions, one stubborn fact is that DRC government has, for the past 30 years, supported the FDLR. FDLR does not just threaten the territorial integrity of Rwanda, it threatens the very existence of Rwanda and its people. One of my uncles paid money in 94, so he could be killed by the bullet. Because there was that situation, you either choose to be shot or you die by a machete. One of my uncles paid money to be killed by a bullet. Everyone can make a decision not to care about the situation of Rwanda and the threat we face. All these people that I'm talking on behalf of, because nobody else does, in the situation they face, But do we also ask them to be participants in their own situation, to be part of the plan for their own extermination? Can we go that far? So to conclude, honorable members of, distinguished members of the Council, we thank the mediators. We thank them very much. And we thank most profoundly the efforts that are going on by the mediators, particularly the United States, to address the most recent situation. And we are willing
not the most recent situation, because the most recent situation is UVIRA, and you know what you did there.
We all commit
so
to implementing in good faith the commitments we made in Washington, and if we support fully the process in Doha, then we possibly have a possibility to have a peaceful solution to the conflict that we have lived with for many, many years. This problem has gone on for too long, and it is our request and our appeal that we should all focus to supporting the present avenues for a peaceful solution. I will not go into what we said in the past. We have been here many times. Why do we have defensive measures, and how are they going to be lifted? All those issues are addressed in the agreements, and we shall continue to work with mediators and to make sure that we meet our part of the challenge. Thank you very much.
Wow.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Yes. Burundi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by congratulating Slovenia on its presidency of the month and for having placed this briefing on MONUSCO on the agenda of the Security Council. Burundi would like to thank the Secretary-General for the presentation of his report and commends MONUSCO's ongoing efforts working under extremely complex conditions. We also appreciate the opportunity given to us to share our assessment of the security situation, and we wish to draw the Council's attention to the dramatic developments in the security and humanitarian situation, particularly in the city of Uvira and its surrounding areas, and the massive displacement of populations with thousands of refugees currently in Burundi, notably in Bujumbura province in the commune of Cibitoke. Burundi wishes to denounce the repeated and ongoing violation of Resolution 2773 as evidenced by the seizure of Uvira by the Rwandan army. These operations have targeted and resulted in countless civilian casualties. We are particularly concerned by the cross-border attacks, including the use of artillery, drones, and other lethal means, some of which have struck localities within Burundian territory. These acts violate Burundi's sovereignty. They endanger the security of civilian populations and undermine collective efforts for peace. We believe that the current moment calls for clarity, political courage, and a collective commitment to the full and effective complete implementation of the Security Council's resolutions, particularly Resolution 2773. The commitments recently undertaken, including those endorsed in the agreements signed in Washington, must be respected by all parties, without ambiguity and without preconditions. We therefore call upon the Council to, firstly, ensure that Security Council resolutions are implemented impartially, because the collective credibility of this Council depends on its ability to guarantee their effective enforcement. The relevance and credibility of MONUSCO are at stake. Secondly, protect civilians, especially women and children, who remain the primary victims of a conflict that has been imposed upon them. Thirdly, we call upon the Council to advocate for urgent humanitarian assistance in the light of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the acute lack of resources available to United Nations system agencies to meet the basic needs of refugees settled in Gatumba and Cibitoke. We also call upon the Council to convene an urgent meeting of the Council at which robust measures could be adopted in order to halt this dangerous escalation, potentially including an arms embargo and a regime of economic sanctions, in order to prevent the continuation of these deadly military operations conducted in violation of international law and, in particular, the Charter of the United Nations. We also call upon the Council to support the Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighbouring states in coordinated efforts to combat armed groups in strict respect for internationally recognised borders. And finally, we call upon the Council to strengthen its support for regional verification and monitoring mechanisms in order to document violations, prevent escalation, and rebuild trust. Furthermore, Burundi wishes to inform this August Council that it has taken very seriously the message conveyed by the bombs launched from Rwanda on the 4th of December onto Burundian soil in the commune of Cibitoke, injuring a woman and a child. We consider this act to be a grave provocation and a manifestation of a belligerent attitude which we strongly condemn. Let me be clear. Restraint has its limits. Should these irresponsible attacks continue, it would become extremely difficult to avoid a direct escalation between our two countries. Burundi cannot tolerate repeated violations of its territorial integrity and reserves the right to exercise self-defense in accordance with the provisions of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Burundi remains a reliable partner for regional peace and security. While it has upheld the protection of civilian populations with dignity in all missions in which it has been deployed, Burundi cannot remain idle in the face of provocations and violations of its territorial integrity. We can't remain idle in the face of attacks against its population, and we cannot remain idle in the face of threats to the stability of our borders. Our message today is therefore a call for restraint, for firmness against proven violations, and for concerted action that will finally allow Eastern DRC, and in particular areas such as Uvira, to envision, finally, a future of lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. The representative of Rwanda has asked for the floor to make a further statement. Before giving him the floor, I just want to say that I don't want to prolong the exchanges, which will not help implement the agreements or the resolution 2773, and neither protect the civilians who are suffering. The council members have heard your message is very clear, and that's why I would ask you to take the floor only once.
Wow.
I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I don't have any intention of unnecessarily prolonging the discussion. Just wanted to clarify that Rwanda is not waging war against the Republic of Burundi and has no intention of doing that. To the contrary, there has been an attack from the territory of Burundi to the area of Bugarama in Rwanda, and in some parts of the DRC, resulting into refugees coming to Rwanda. I believe the UNHCR is already involved in that process. So I wanted to make that clarification.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so very much. Umva rero bavandimwe, reka nongere bashimire na koze ikiganiro ahantu hatari comfortable, ariko nagira ngo mvuge kuri utuntu dutoya cyane, duke ariko mwumvise namwe ku bavuga ururimi rw'icyongereza n'igifaransa cyangwa se icyongereza gusa, kandekeraho gusharinga. Okay. Reka mbasuhuze. Ndashaka kugira ngo ahangaha ndaho nshaka ahantu twakumvikana gatoya. Hopefully, now this is meze nk'ubuntu ndiyo ndimura amazi ngo mboneho nicara, ariko reka nze tuvuge, urabona ko nimeze nk'uwicaye ku gasozi ku Kanunga, ariko reka nkoreho video, it's not necessary. Icyo nshaka kubabwira cyangwa se icyo nshaka kuvuga ni commentaire ku tuntu dutoya cyane. Mu bantu bavuze hari ibihugu byavuze ibintu biri outstanding, I mean kuri kubijyanye na discours. Ntabwo ari uvuga ni outstanding ku byo bakoze, ariko discours yabo numvise mu by'ukuri ariyo kwankuraja cyangwa se yakoze ishobora kuzana malaise kuri leta y'u Rwanda. Icya mbere ni discours discours ya Etazini y'Ubufaransa. Njye ntabwo nigeze numva ari ibintu bihambaye. Ubufaransa bwavuze ko ari bo ba pen holder, ariko ntabwo bwigeze bujya muri detail nyinshi cyane, ariko njye ntabwo mbirwanya, kubera ko biranashoboka ko mu by'ukuri yenda muri iki gihe turimo kuvuga ibigambo byinshi atari ngombwa. Yenda hari ibyo bari buze gukora nyuma bishobora kuba bifite ishingiro kuruta ibijye, kubera ko mwibuke ko na perezida wabo ariwe nanone wari wavuze ikibuga cy'indege cya Goma ejo bundi ubwo yari yagiye muri ubwo nako bari mu Bufaransa, akavuga ko icyo kibuga cy'indege cya Goma kigomba gufungurwa, ndetse n'igihe ari South Africa mu bintu bya G20 nabwo icyo kintu yakigarutseho. Ariko mve ku Bufaransa tujye ku bandi. China nta kintu na kimwe yigeze ivuga kireba u Rwanda. M23 ntimuzongere rero kumbwira ngo China iri ku nyungu zayo, iri ku bintu, iyo niba ifitanye amasezerano n'u Rwanda nta kintu na kimwe ushobora kuvuga kireba u Rwanda. Hanyuma Ubwongereza bwavuze ijambo rigufi cyane, ariko nanjye nyuma yaho uriya munyamerika yaramaze kuvuga ariya magambo nk'ariya, I think ntabwo nari kujya mu magambo menshi cyane, kubera ko bigaragara ko Amerika niyo ifite niyo pen holder, niyo ifite pana pen holder kuri iriya masezerano ya Washington Accord, nibo bantu bafite byinshi bantu babategerejeho, cyane cyane ko aribo bahagarariye isinywa ryariya masezerano. So nibaza ko nabyo byatumye bariya bantu bo muri West, yaba Ubufaransa, yaba Ubwongereza, yaba na Ubufaransa, Ubwongereza ndetse na Amerika, Uburusiya na China bavuga ibintu bimwe. Nababwiye ni umuntu ashobora kubandikira na discours agakomeza akabandikira discours yarangiza akayibaha akatika mujye kuyisoma. Ariko mbere yuko dutandukana, ko turi buze kongera mu kindi kiganiro gishyushye cyane, mfite ikiganiro hano kuvuganira wishyushye, ariko mfite ikiganiro nimugoroba turi buze kuganiraho kuri actualité, harimo ziriya promotion z'abasirikare ba RDF, kuko ndabizi ko mugomba kumva why ziriya promotion. Kuri ntabwo nshaka guspoilinga ikiganiro ngo yenda ntangire mvuge impamvu mbona ari bijyanye n'ibintu turimo kuvuga none, ariko bijyanye cyangwa se bijyanye n'iyi, bishobora kuba bijyanye mu by'ukuri n'iyi resolution. Kagame ashobora kuba yarayabimenye azi exactement icyo azi. Ntabwo ari njye ukuyeho video yanjye, okay, ndayibonye, nayishaka kuyigaruraho. Ntabwo Kagame arabizi impamvu y'iyi nama ya UN. Icyo nashaka kuvuga rero ahangaha kuri icyo kiganiro sinshaka kugispoilinga, turi buze kukigarukaho. Abandi bantu bavuze ku Rwanda harimo nk'uriya wa Denmark, havuze nk'uriya wa Denmark nayo yavuze neza, ariko ivuga u Rwanda rimwe gusa. Ariko reka nsubire inyuma. Hari umuntu wo muri Médecins Sans Frontières, abaganga batagira umupaka, umudokiteri ufite izina rimeze nk'ari iki cyarabu cyangwa, yatanze raporo iri damning. Ndetse munibaze impamvu, kubera iki bahisemo kumuzana naho, kuki bazanye kuki bazanye Médecins Sans Frontières. Yego bajya bazana abatemwe batandukanye, hari igihe bazana abantu baba victime, ariko ubu noneho bazanye uwa Médecins Sans Frontières. Yavuze amagambo arimo akababaro kenshi cyane kajyanye abagore uburyo bafatwa ku ngufu, ndetse ku buryo ngo bavuze ko batagitinya gufatwa ku ngufu. Ayo ni amagambo yavuzwe n'abavictime, kuko baba bazi ko bese baba bitegereje, ni ikintu ni ubuzima bwabo bwa buri munsi. Iyo bazi ko izo ngabo cyangwa se abarebere bari muri nta muntu mbese nta burenganzira bafite, babafata bakora ibyo bintu bya sex slavery cyangwa se n'aba sex slaves. By the way, ibintu mwibuke ko hari raporo yakozwe na Osakawa cyangwa Onagawa, Osaka something, uriya mu damu wakoze ikiganiro twamucishije ahangaha, Denise Zaneze yamukoresha interview kuri YouTube, natwe twayishyizeho ari one of the weekends, ari muri weekend. So uretse ibyo, uyu mugabo yagiye muri details nyinshi cyane ziri so troubling, zigaragaza ubuzima bwa buri munsi biteye ubwoba. I'm so sorry. Nanumva andi majwi nanayobeye uko bimeze. So reka ngaruke rero kuri Amerika. Amerika yari yavuze amagambo akomeye cyane. Twavuga tuti amagambo ni kimwe, ariko ibikorwa ni ibindi. Yes, fine. Ariko reka mvuge kuri Etazini. Njyewe ndafite icyizere gikomeye cyane. Mfite icyizere gikomeye cyane. Kubera iki mfite icyo cyizere? yabanje kuvuga ambasaderi wa Amerika ati Perezida Trump yanejejwe no guha welcome cyangwa se kuzana Perezida Tshisekedi n'u Rwanda muri Washington, yumva ko ari intambwe ya mbere kuzana amahoro. Ariko turi disappointed, birababaje kubona uko ibintu byahise bihinduka iminsi mikeya nyuma yo gusinya ariya masezerano. Ariko si icyo gitangaje, yavuze ati ibi nibi u Rwanda yarureze ko ari rwo rukora biriya byose. Biriya bigambo bavuga ngo baraduteye bya bigambo Kagame yavugaga ejo so Kagame rero banza ari muri ba bantu bajya bavuga ngo barabeshya, ngo Kagame, ngo Amerika iramushyigikiye, ngo arahetse. Ashobora kuba yumva n'akavuga tuzi kuko bashobora kuba banshyigikiye, ariko bakaba batabimbwira. Njyewe nibyo numvise, kuko ahangaha umunyamerika yavuze ati noneho reka mbabwire n'ibindi bintu mutari muzi. Agatereka nze mbabwire n'ibindi bintu mwebwe mutari muzi. Arabwira ati u Rwanda nirwo rugenzura M23, yaba mu gisirikare, haba ndetse no gutanga ibikoresho, haba gukoresha formation, haba no gukoresha imyitozo nako no kubaha no kubaha donc uburyo bayobora ibintu byose na leadership yabo byose mu gisirikare cya M23. Cya kabiri arababwira ati ni nawe controller, u Rwanda nirwo rukontorora AFC mu buryo politike, mu rwego politike na logistique, nibo babakorera buri kintu cyose. Aranababwira ati ni nabo baba deployinga, that was huge, nibo babohereza aho babohereza. Hanyuma doko nibo bashyira aho bajya, aho bagira gutebira byose, haba ari AFC, haba ndetse ari haba ari AFC ndetse hakaba na AFC ndetse na M23. Ariko ikintu cyanshimishije kurutaho, uretse ko twebwe dusanga tubivuga, by the way, nta banga rihari, bavuze bati bavuze ngo u Rwanda ibintu M23 ikora, ibyo AFC ikora, ko byose ari kugira ngo babagere, donc ni intumwa zabo, ni baba deployinga kugira ngo bagere kuri objectif, bagere ku ntumbero zabo. Donc u Rwanda rwohereza M23 ariko ku nyungu z'u Rwanda, pana nyungu za M23. Nuvuga ngo biriya bigambo byose uriya avuze, biriya bigambo byose ngo gavuze ngo abanyamurenge bande, nta numwe usanze ibyo bintu bifite agaciro, no. Kubera ko deja bafite mind iri made up, bararangiye, barabizi buri kintu cyose. It's just nukuvuga ngo ngoga aratigiye gusa, aratigiye ibyo yavuze. Bantuka iriya raporo yanshimishije cyane, iriya briefing y'umunyamerika, kuvuga ati ibyo yabanje aravuga ati reka mbabwire ibindi additional information. Ni nko kubabwira uretse ritari muri biriya byavuzwe n'aba under secretary, bitari mu byavuzwe mu byo ba briefingaga, nicyo babwiraga, ibyo bavuze mwabyumvise, ariko reka mbahe n'ibindi mutari muzi. Okay, noneho arongera aravuga ati mu Rwanda hari harimo abagera ku 7,000 by'abasirikare, ibihumbi by'abasirikare ibihumbi by'abasirikare mbere yuko baza muri iyi event, muri iki gihe gishyashya cyo gutera, muri iyi event nshyashya yo gutera Uvira. Donc mbere ya Uvira hari 7 birenga, ariko ubu ngubu ngo hiyongereho abandi. Mwibuke ko nababwiye indi brigade nayo bagiye, hari indi brigade nayo bagiye kuvana kuri training batararangiza. By the way, kuvana training abantu batarangiza amahugurwa kuri training ntabwo ari sinye nziza kuri Kagame, ntabwo ari sinye nziza na busa. Ntabwo ari sinye nziza na busa na busa. Nashakaga amazi yanjye ariko ndayabonye. So it's not a good sign kumva bavuga ngo bari bariho muri training batarayirangiza bakabavanayo bakabahura igitaraganya. So dusubire kuri UN ariko gatoya mbere yuko mbacika. Noneho bongereyeho, avuga ko bongereyeho abandi. Ikintu kindi yavuze umunyamerika, yavuze ati ndagira ngo mbabwire ko tuzakoresha uburyo dufite, tuzabukoresha kugira ngo ari amasezerano akore icyo yasinyiwe. Okay. Ziriya ngamba z'ubwirinzi umunyamerika yavuze ko bazishyize muri no muri sud, no kuvuga ngo bashobora kuba bafite ebyiri. Ziriya missile bazivuze, barongera navuga ko u Rwanda na M23 bopera hamwe, bakora operation hamwe, kandi ko bagiye kurwana muri Uvira bari kumwe bombi. Banavuga ko dufite amaraporo yumvikana tuzi yuko bakoresha n'amadrone ya kamikaze y'ubwiyahuzi. Ayo nayo Amerika yavuze ko bafite iyo information iri credible. Ntabwo bakeneye kubwira byinshi, bafite satellite hejuru mu kirere ireba ibyo bintu byose. Ndetse aranavuga ko ni nabo bateye ariya mabombe mu Burundi. Abo n'abanyamerika bivuze bati ni mwebwe mwateye ariya mabombe mu Burundi. Ikindi bavuga ko u Rwanda ibi mikorwa barimo gukora rurimo rurajyana iriya region, birajyana akarere mu ntambara, muri ntambara yeruye. Muragira ngo ibyo bintu ntibyamaze, uragira ngo biriya bintu ntabwo byarangiye? Icyo cyarangiye icyo cy'intambara yeruye. It's over, it's done deal. Ni ibintu nyine bigaragara ko mu by'ukuri yes, bariho baragerageza ibyo bashobora, ariko kuyikumira njyewe ntabwo mbibona. Ntabwo mbona Kagame ashobora keretse aramutse avuze ati mbuvuyemo, ntabwo ndi bukomeze kuza gukora ubu bwiyahuzi cyangwa kuya gushyira abanyarwanda muri aka kaga. Ntabwo nashaka no kubyumva. So birababaje cyane kubona abanyarwanda bagiye kuba ibitambo by'uyu mutwe munini wa Kagame, kandi hari agahenge bavandimwe nshuti z'u Rwanda, abanyarwanda, agahenge kari gahari, ariko mwabyumvise ko Kagame we is not interested. Ariko ibyo byo ndabizi ko bigiye ntabwo nta gisibya, kuko turadiringa n'umusazi. Yaba ari ukuvuga ngo ufite yenda umuntu ushyira mu gaciro ukamubwira uti ugiye gushyira akarere mu ntambara, kuri we aravuga ati nuko nzapfa, ngomba guhitamo uko nzapfa, namaze kwemera uko nzapfa, niko nshaka kuzapfamo, kumbwira ibindi. Ibyo nicyo kibazo gihari, kandi nabibonye ko nawe ibintu inzira zose arimo gukora ari iyo ngendo arimo kugenda. Ariko narebye ubwoba bafite muri biriya bifobagane, birasa nkaho biriho bitangiye kumva iyi message, birabyumva neza cyane. Ndetse n'ibyo mbona Nyemesye Ngoga hariya nawe nabibonye ko afite ikintu cy'ubwoba, nubwo niba nakita humility ntabwo mbizi, kwicisha agenda agira gutya buri mwanya, agira gutya buri mwanya, agira gutya, ntabwo nzi icyo byari bishatse kuvuga mu by'ukuri. Biriya bintu biteye ubwoba. Noneho baravuga ati twebwe rero tugiye gukora uruhande rwacu ngo kugira ngo spoiler ari we nyine spoiler n'ibandi n'u Rwanda nta bandi hasigaye babanze bakore ngo donc babaryoze ibyo bakoze. Ayo ni amagambo y'umuambasaderi w'Amerika, to bring the spoiler to account. Okay, uwo ni umunyamerika. Hanyuma arayandi magambo make cyane ko nanjye ngomba kugenda, nshaka kugira ngo mbabwire iyo mwakura muri nanone muri iyi ibyo mwakura muri iyi briefing, ndumva cyane cyane Kongo ntabwo nyitindaho kuko yavuze ati amasezerano arahari ariko kutayakurikiza that's a problem. Icyo ni ikibazo gikomeye cyane, kudakurikiza amasezerano. Donc ni ntacyo bivuze kuko bizakomeza kudakora consequence, kudashyiraho ingaruka kuba yavogereye, byemvita ahubwo no kuyahonyora. U Rwanda nirwo nshaka kuvuga. Uburundi cyakora, reka mpere ku Burundi. Uburundi bwavuze ati ntabwo tuzakomeza kurebera threat z'intambara ziri ku muryango w'igihugu cyacu. Ntabwo tuzongera kuzakomeza kurebera mu gihe amabomba akomeje guterwa mu gihugu cyacu. Ntabwo tuzarebera mu gihe umurundikazi umutekano wabo uri andanje. Ibyo ngibyo ni message yumvikana. Hanyuma rero turajya kuri mvuge nako ku Rwanda. U Rwanda ruvuze ibigambo biteye ubwoba, ibigambo ahuragwa ibigambo ati sasa ati ngewe rwose u Rwanda, ati nibuka ambasaderi ahangaha muri 1994 igihe yari yicaye aha muri iyi nteko avuga ko abantu barimo gupfa nta muntu washatse kubyitaho, aravuga ati ngewe nanjye kuba ndiho ni ukubera u Rwanda rwagize icyo rukora. Wabumvise ya mvugo ya Kagame? Noneho araza aravuga ati ngewe ubwanjye ndanarokotse kandi kurokoka kwanjye, ibyo ngibyo nibyo yavugaga ati kurokoka kwanjye ngukesha u Rwanda. Arangije ariko ngiye kubabwira ibintu nibandaho, ati ibindi byose ngenda nirengagije n'ibindi, ati reka nibande kuri iki kintu. Avuga abatutsi b'abanyamurenge, avuga ko abatutsi b'abanyamurenge ngo bari muri bari mu kaga. Avuga pourcentage umuntu yakagombye no kubaza ati se wo Kanyagwa we, iyi mibare uyivana hehe, ninde wakoze iyi raporo? Ngo 80 y'anoza z'abanyamurenge ngo zarasenywe. Okay, ubwo ni Kagame nako ni iriya disikuru za Kagame mwumva zo baba barakopiye neza neza, ni copy code. Ati ku itariki iyi n'iyi, wakwibaza ukavuga uti se ayo manyago y'amatariki muyandika ryari, muyabwirwa mubikura hehe, credibility ni yihe, cyangwa se ni mwebwe ubwanyu mubikora? None harongera ati Uburundi mayimayi, harani yancekeje ngo Uburundi ngo na mayimayi ngo bakora operation hamwe. Simbe ntabwo nari mbizi nge ariko atari byo, ni ibintu by'ibinyo, nibwo bwa mbere mbyumvise, mbese n'icyo kirego nibwo bwa mbere nyumvise. Noneho ati Burundi ngo bwakoresheje drone ya CH4. Ntabwo nari nzi ko Burundi bufite drone ya CH4 ngo bwaje kurasa ngo mu banyamurenge. Hanyuma avuga ngo nyirarume ngo yapfuye mu Rwanda, ngo hari mu nyirarume wapfuye mu Rwanda. No, yavuze kuri FDL arangije avuga nyine ngo kuno nyirarume ngo mbere yuko apfa, ibintu bya sympathy bajya bashaka kuzana ibyo kugira ngo bagirire impuhwe. Ngewe nakumva bifite agaciro igihe waba mu by'ukuri nawe ufata akanya ukazigirira abandi. Nanjye uramutse ugiriye impuhwe bariya abanyekongo, wirirwa ubombarda, wirirwa ukata imitwe, wirirwa utera, usenyera, wirirwa ugira impunzi, ejo barimo baravuga Uvira abantu bimutse bagiye kubera yuko bimutse kubera iyi ntambara. Ariko noneho kwimuka ntabwo ari cyo kibazo cyane, uburyo bagiye bicwa mu nzira, mu mihanda. So uramutse uvuze uti nanjye mfitiye impuhwe abantu, ukerekana impuhwe aho unyura hose, ni ukuri nanjye nakugira impuhwe. Ariko kuzana argument ya jenoside kandi mu by'ukuri aho unyura hose bigaragara ko nawe ugenda urimbura abantu, ni ukuvuga ko n'icyo kintu ni ikinyoma, nta n'impuhwe ugirira abantu. Cyangwa se niba niyo jenoside yarabaye ntacyo mwabivanyemo kijyanye n'uburenganzira bwa muntu, kuba jenoside itakaba urugero cyangwa se isomo ntago mvuga ngo niba yarabaye yenda abantu babyumve nabi ngo batekereze ko mvuga ngo ndabyibazaho, ndavuga iyo the fact yuko genocide yabaye, ukaba wowe utashobora kuvuga ngo noneho kubera ko jenoside yabaye biduhaye isomo ry'uburenganzira bwa kiremwamuntu ku buryo ngomba kwita ku buzima bw'umuntu kubera ko nabonye uburyo bibabaza kubura uwawe, cyangwa se ubwo nawe nabonye ko bibabaza kugira um, ko bibabaza kugira za atrocities, gufatwa ku ngufu, gutemwa, kuba ibimuga, kugira ibyo bintu nanjye byatuma ntekereza ko nuza muri UN ukaza gukora ugafata flow ukavuga discours nk'izi ngizi, yes navuga ni you know what that makes sense, akababaro baciyemo barakumva, ni nayo mpamvu bita no ku bandi cyangwa akababaro k'abandi, niyo mpamvu bafitiye impuhwe abo banyamurenge. Ariko niba uvuga gusa ngo jyewe nzagira impuhwe umuntu witwa ubwoko tutsi gusa, ariko umufurero umubembe uti wese nzahitana, nawe bajya murenge, nabyo ndabivuze gusa kubera ndi mu kiganiro kugira ngo arguma yawe nyikomeze, ariko nabo nta mpuhwe bafitiye, urabica, ahubwo ni no kugenzura niba nabo utabica, kuko ntabwo wambwiye ngo ufitiye impuhwe abanyamurenge b'imurenge ariko ntuze kunyereka ko ufitiye impuhwe aba batutsi bagenzi bawe batari n'abanyamurenge, batari n'abanyamurenge b'abatutsi bari babega cyangwa se abaki abanyiginya bari aho ngaho mu Rwanda. You show me, nyereka mu by'ukuri yuko ufite impuhwe z'abatutsi bari mu gihugu, noneho uvuge uti abari murenge ntahuye nabo, bo noneho bo ngiye kubapfira noneho no kubatangira ibitambo. Bya bindi Bibiliya yavuze ngo waba udakunda mwene so wabonye ugakunda umuntu ngo harya ngo utabonye babyita gute hahandi, iryo somo rivuga ngo waba Imana utabonye, waba udakunda mwene so uri ruhande rwawe ukajya gukunda Imana utabonye. That's exactly the case y'abanyamurenge. Waba udakunda aba batutsi b'iwawe mu Rwanda ubamariye ku icumu basenyera ubagize inshike abandi ntere, ukambwira ngo hari abantu njye numva ngo batuye mu misozi y'imurenge iyo ngiyo, ngo njya gutabara ngo numva ngo barasenyewe, ngo numva ngo baragize gute. So are you stupid cyangwa you think everybody is stupid? So none uyu nawe araje ngo rwose ngo twaratabaje, Minisitiri w'Ububanyi n'Amahanga yabivuze ngo arabona yibwiye ngaha ngo muri kanso, ngo arabona yibwiye hana arabona agize gute na gute, abantu bose ati twaratabaje twaravuze ntako tutagize. Ngo abanyamurenge s'il vous plaît, ariko baragowe, ntabwo ko tutsi bwaragowe mana yanjye, ngo barashize ngo imirima inzu zabo, hanyuma se wakubaza inzu abantu senyera mu Rwanda ko wumva badistroyinze iyo mihana, ko bayidistroyinze mu Rwanda abanyarwanda bakaba basenyerwa under iyo leadership. Ntabwo ari ukuvuga ngo ukeneye kwambuka abasirikare muri Kangondo ngo be kubasenyera, ntabwo ukeneye kwambutsa abasirikare muri Kimisagara Gasyata hehe, n'ayo mabwirize ko hagaraka ntimusenye ari ijambo ryawe ryonyine, ibyo ntibyigeze bitangwa bibaho, ariko ukaza kuzana ibintu byo kwigira ngo uri umunyempuhwe nta rusoni. Abanyamurenge nize ko abanyamurenge barabuze kumusubiza ariko vuba cyane. Nsoza rero mwabavandimwe mwe, ndaza kugaruka kuri gatoya, ariko icyo nababwira cyo nuko hari ndabona ahangaha uko izuba rigenda rihinduka, amafoto yanjye mu kujya agenda ahinduka nkaba urwirungu wagira ngo niteye naguye mu ifarine, ariko ndaza kubigarukaho nijoro nimugoroba mu kiganiro cyacu, ndaza gukora ikiganiro hakiri kare gatoya, ariko seriously murebe ibi bintu birimo kudevelopa. Abanyarwanda bafitiye impuhwe, bafite impuhwe nyinshi cyane. It's crazy, it is crazy, it is crazy, it's crazy. Abanyarwanda bafitiye impuhwe, abari mu gihugu imbere ko Kagame yanangiye ntabanga, kandi kunangira kwe ntabwo kuri butume amahanga amwihorera. Baramuhaze ndugu zangu Banyarwanda, ndabizi ko murimo kunkurikira cyangwa muzankurikira, ubutumwa mugerageze kubageza kuri bose abo mwumva mubwira. Ntabwo ibyo Kagame ababeshya, ntabwo ari byo ko yenda ari kuri nivo imwe na Tshisekedi. Kagame aranzwe cyane, aranzwe, nta n'umuntu ushaka nta muntu ushaka kwintertaininga biriya bigambo bye. Icyo ngicyo cyararenze, iyo train yaragiye. Ariko we mu Rwanda arashaka kubereka ko yenda hari abamwumva. Nabonye umunyamakuru amubaza akamubwira ati no, ati nta cyahagaritse, turacyari ABC. No, ça c'est pas le cas. Ntabwo ariko bimeze, ibintu bimeze nabi cyane. Noneho rero ikindi kigiye gukurikiraho, nabibonye, muze gutegereza ikiganiro cyanjye ndibuze gukora nijoro. Ikiganiro ndibuze gukora nijoro kiraza kubaha picture ya Kagame going forward, na nyuma y'iyi briefing ya UN. Ndetse UN irangije ku briefing, ariko ntabwo inama irangiye, bagiye kubonana mu mwiherero, mu muhezo. Bose bagiye bagaruka kuri 2773 27773, bagiye bagaruka kuri Washington Accord. Ibyo byose ntabwo ari byiza ku Banyarwanda, ntabwo ari byiza kuri Banyarwanda mwebwe muri mu Rwanda. Ni ukuri mufite ikibazo gikomeye cyane, mufite ibyago, reka ariko mbyita, reka ne kuvuga ikibazo, mufite ibyago bikomeye cyane. Kandi Kagame ntabeshya avuge ngo amahanga arabanga, ntabeshye ngo avuge ngo ni ukubera ko amahanga yahagurukiye ngo kurwana u Rwanda. Ntawubanga, nta muntu wanga u Rwanda, yanga ibyo Kagame akora. Ariko nawe yaparveniye kubereka ko ari we Rwanda, akavuga ati erega ati barashaka gukuraho u Rwanda bakarurimbura neza. Iyo avuga u Rwanda of course ingaruka zabyo nawe ashobora kubarimburira, ariko ntabwo abavuga Abanyarwanda, ntabwo bavuga Abanyarwanda kuko ariko bamubwiye. Oya, ubu ni nk'uko bamubwira bakamubwira ati mva rero shaho, nudakora ibi ngibi ingaruka zirikweho. Nibaza ko ntabwo sinzi kuziteguye, agafunga umutwe akavunira ibiti mu mutwe. Banyarwanda, inshuti za East African Daily Update broadcasting kuva mu modoka, ndagira ngo mbasezereho, kandi twongere guhura nako mu biganiro byacu ku mugoroba. Ndabasuhuje rero abankurikiye, loyal listeners barimo Innocent, Ngarambe, Kwihangana, Kizito, Innocent ndabona akivuga, Habi J Lock, thank you very much, urakoze. Hanyuma Beautiful, asante sana nawe. Congolese Telema, magambo azinye umuriro. Well, we don't know, I don't think this is the end of it. Gaspar Mucho, asante sana, ndagushimiye cyane. Na Marie-Jeanne Mukankuranga, nawe ndagushimiye, nakibonye cya kigoryi. Niyo nsaba yambu, nawe kandi wakoze. Providentiel, reka kunsetsa se datuma ntangira nanjye kugenda mpengamye di. Uwo ninde ni Prudentiel, reka kunsetsa, uragica ahangaha niko nahataye. Seki yari Providential 102. Niyo nsaba, ndumva nagusuhuje. Rwegura yambu, ndagusuhuze cyane, mbanza umutima Rwegura. Hanyuma ese oh I see ntabwo nzongera kubikora. Nabyumvise, so nabyibonye. Hanyuma Muhigirwa Eli, aha, nabyumvise, ibyo ngibyo nabyo barabizi kandi ndabizi ko mubishaka, ndabizi kandi ndizera ko Kagame wariyo mugambi afite. Ah, Itangi Komera, MCI Ngabire, indi uravuga nk'ibyo navugaga mu kanya. Niyo Mugabo Felix, oya nibizima, nibizima biriya bintu nibizima iby'uyu munsi nabikunze. Rwegura inshuro 12 bavuga abanyamurenge, ni nabo yavuze gusa, by the way, nta nubwo byaye niryo kuvuga ngo umutekano w'u Rwanda wongeye kubigarukaho. Beautiful, komera cyane. Boy bye rwose. Football legend, wamwumvise ask to be killed by machete, yashaka kuvuga ngo amasasi. This stupid Mr. Ngoga. Yeah. Oya humura, ubwo nabiretse nabyumvise ikibazo mufite, cyane cyane nk'abantu bari ku mugabane wa Afrika baba bari subscribed, hari igihe bibagora. MCI Ingabire, komera cyane. Itangi Muntu Ntwari Sambi, Gaspar Mucho, Investment, Mbavu Moya, arabako Muhigirwa, hari abantu bamwe batamvaga yenda n'icyongereza. Ariko iyo avuga ngo starving, ukagira ngo mu Rwanda nta bantu ba starving kandi babaye starved by igihugu cyabo, abayobozi babo mwirwa mumena ibyo kurya byabo baheretse ku mutwe, mwanariza mukaza kuvuga nta rusoni. Muhigirwa Ngoga nta intervention yaheze. Calvin Bagirisha Mpore, Muhigirwa nyandikire niba ushaka ko nguha inbox speech ye yose ndayiguha, cyangwa the whole thing. Abanyamurenge banza batakiri muri Kongo, umugani wawe. Lolola Flame na Charles Bruce n'iryari ryakaga. Oh, nta majwi, byari byapfuye. Wambaye neza ni Jeremy Muhizi, urakoze cyane. Dave WhatsApp, yabivuze nyamara. Intare Gasuruba, byari byageze aho birahagarara. Igo Mingo, nabigaruye bigeze, mbabarire cyane. Nangoya atangiye kuri Ngoya, ubwo niwe washobora ko atangiye kuri manganya. Okay. Ubwiyunge Kayikwamba, iyo bahagaze aratetere, hari ibintu yakoraga nanjye ntashoboye kumenya ibyo ari byo. Ijuru Muntu Ntwari, John Ayishakiye, Shaba, sindi kugabo ngo yishwe na Kagame. Ambo Albert Bizabarimana, Niyonsaba Fulgence, Ruberanziza Jean de Dieu, Flemme Ombeni Vincent Santos, nukondano ombeni Justin Fuhaha. No, something is working. Yerusufero Kagame yaragujeho izoteba imudaho y'amaraso. Duma Turin Adu Gaspar Mucho umugani wawe banza bazamwiga cyakora birababaje ariko kuko ntawe uvuga wazalendo yirirwa yica abantu. Ambo Rutaha Steven nawe wakoze ubwo rero ndasoreza kuri muntu ntwari Sam. Reka mbasezereho kandi tuze gusubira mu kiganiro cyacu cya nimugoroba. Ciao my friends, my viewers, ni naho mukanya. Bye.